I'm Teresa Heitsenrether. I'm the CEO of Securities Services and a member of JPMorgan's operating committee. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Reshma Saujani for a conversation that I know will be very candid and enlightening. Reshma is a leading activist and founder of Girls Who Code and the Marshall Plan for Moms. She spent more than a decade building movements to fight for women and girls' economic empowerment and working to close the gender gap in technology, and most recently advocating for policies to support moms impacted by the pandemic. Reshma is a graduate of the University of Illinois, Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, and Yale Law School. And she is the author of the international bestseller Brave Not Perfect, and her influential TED Talk, Teach Girls Bravery Not Perfection, has more than 5 million views globally. So Reshma, that is an impressive background. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Terrific. So I know we're going to have a very candid and active conversation, but let's get the ball rolling here by talking a little bit, if we can, about your background and some of the experiences that have led you on the path that you're on. So I did get a chance to read Brave Not Perfect, and I watched your TED Talk and was very inspired by the path that you've taken. And I think that your amazing pedigree is one that will be familiar to a lot of people at JPMorgan and on this call, around your success in going through Ivy League education, working at prestigious law firms and financial firms. And then, in your words, you had what was a humiliating failure that led you to your true passion. So, can you share a little bit with us about your story?
My parents came here as refugees in 1973. They were both trained engineers, and this country was desperately seeking engineers. And so my parents became two of 1,000 refugees who got status to come here. Even though they were engineers, my father worked as a machinist in a plant. My mother sold cosmetics. And my dad, every night, even though he was exhausted, he would read me these little Reader's Digest books about Dr. King and Mahatma Gandhi. So from the time I was a little girl, like I knew that I wanted to change the world. I graduated law school, grad school with $300,000 in student loan debt. I naively thought that I'd go get my job at Davis Polk, right, and go pay off that student loan debt in like a year or two. And I ended up waking up like 10 years later, not at Davis Polk, but at, in financial services, working as a corporate lawyer. And I found myself like in a job that I hated and in a life that I didn't want. I was one of the fortunate ones that knew from the time I was 12, like what I wanted to do. And that debt that I had really kind of tied me to, working in the private sector when all I wanted to do was serve my country. And so I got the courage through a friend who called me and said, just quit, to say I was going to run for United States Congress. And in 2020, I ran against an 18-year incumbent. I was the first Indian American woman to ever run for United States Congress. I naively thought that I could shake every hand and meet every voter. I convinced John Legend to do not just one, but two concerts for me. Like I thought I was going to win. And on election day, it wasn't even close. I got less than 19% of the vote. And I woke up and I was broke. I was humiliated. I had pissed off everybody in the Democratic establishment. But the aha moment for me was that I wasn't broken. Like I wasn't broken. I had thought for so long that like if I tried something and I failed at it, that it would literally break me. And so I would give up before I even tried. And so this experience was kind of like the beginning, I say, of like living my life brave, not perfect, and not running away from failure or the threat of failure.
That's an incredible story, and I think that's a lesson for everyone that is afraid of failure. And I think again, in reading your book, there was a lot there that resonated with me about perfection. And I think the standards that women hold themselves to, whether it's pleasing your parents as a young girl or having the answers in class and getting along with people, we are very much, in your words, socialized for perfection. Can you talk a bit about what is that kind of cultural norm that's running through here, and what is the impact that it has
Yeah.
on girls and women ultimately in their careers?
So I got obsessed with like the socialization of perfection when I did a TED Talk a couple years ago. And in my TED Talk, I tell the story about girls who code. So when girls come to girls who code, like none of them have coded before. And during that first week, like everybody is starting from the same baseline. But every girls who code teacher would tell me the same story. And it went something like this. A student would call her teacher over and she'd say, I don't know what code to write. And the teacher would look at the screen and she'd see a blank text editor. So if she didn't know any better, she thought that her student spent the past 20 minutes just staring at the screen. But when she pressed undo a few times, she saw that her student actually wrote code and then deleted it. So instead of showing the progress that she made, she rather showed nothing at all. This idea of perfection or bust. I tell this talk on the TED stage. I walk off and I am inundated with messages from women who say, I do this too. From girls who say, I do this too. From dads who say, my daughter does this too. And it didn't matter whether you were black or white, rich or poor, a banker, a teacher, an artist, or a dancer. Somewhere along the line, you had learned how to delete the code of your life. And what I mean by that is somewhere along the line, you had learned how to give up before you even tried. So I wrote this book because I was like, well, is that true? And more importantly, like, if it's true, like, when does it start? And then what are the impacts of it? And then how do we unlearn it? And so the socialization of perfection starts really young. Like, go to any playground and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. We tell our daughters, we tell our boys to climb up the monkey bars and just jump head first. But with our girls, it's like, be careful, honey. Don't swing too high. Did you take that toy away from her? Give it back. And so it starts because for some reason, we feel like we need to physically protect our girls, literally wrap them up with bubble wrap. I have two sons. And my first son, Sean, came to me when he was a couple years old. He said, Mommy, I'm afraid of the dark. I go to Bye Bye Baby. I buy a nightlight. Every night we go up the stairs. I put him in his room, turn on the nightlight. I go to my room. 20 minutes later, my husband, Nahal, comes up the stairs, takes out the nightlight. Sean screams. We did this for a couple of days, right? Finally, I said to my husband, like, what is your problem? He's afraid of the dark. And my husband, in my house, my feminist husband says, we got to toughen him up. And I said to him, Nahal, if Sean was a girl, would you let her have the nightlight? And to his credit, he was like, you're right, I would. So there's something about we want to physically protect our girls, push our boys off, you know what I mean? Like
monkey bars.
And then this physical protection extends into emotional protection. And I think for those of us who have daughters, remember, like when our daughter comes home from gymnastics and she's crying and she said, Mommy, I can't do a cartwheel. We say, it's okay, honey. You don't have to go to gymnastics anymore. I'll put you into soccer, right? And so it extends into wanting to emotionally protect them from fear and rejection. And so we start getting addicted to perfection and we start gravitating towards the things that we're good at and moving away from the things that we think we're not good at. And the implications of this are enormous. If you look at the implications on, education, when women declare economics as a major, but they get a B in an entry-level course, they drop out. Whereas boys are like, I got a D, I'm running for president, right? Completely different ramifications. You see this in our mental health. I mean, quite frankly, COVID is an example of that. The rates of anxiety and depression, we are the most, mothers are the most depressed and anxious population in the United States. We see it in leadership, that study that says, men apply for a job if they meet 60% of the qualifications, and we don't even apply unless we meet 100. We don't even apply if we can't check off every single box. So, if we're waiting to be perfect to lead, if we're waiting to be perfect to live, we're never going to close the leadership gap.
Absolutely. I just want to circle back a minute on Girls Who Code as well, and the experience you had on your campaign trail when you were shaking hands and meeting people and going to different schools in the US. Like, what did you see there that actually provided the motivation for you to start Girls Who Code? And talk a little bit about, you've reached number of people in different countries, and it's having a real profound impact. I'd love to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, like when I started Girls Who Code, it was 2020. So you were just starting to see the tech revolution, like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And, I wasn't a woman in tech. So I was like, I remember going into these, New York City classrooms, the computer science classes or robotics labs, and just seeing lines and lines and lines of boys, not a girl in sight. And like, I knew that Silicon Valley was a boys' club, but I didn't know that that club started in high school. And it really pissed me off. The other thing is like, I was a daughter of working class immigrants. I've had a job since I was 12 years old. And again, when I heard that you can make $120,000 as a software programmer, I was like, girls, we got to go get it, right? Like, and so that my motivation in really building Girls Who Code was about jobs, was about the opportunity. And then was also about the fact that, like, I knew a lot of girls were like me and they wanted to change the world. And that having the superpower of technology to help you find a cure to COVID, cancer, climate, that was a game changer. And so I had no, when I built Girls Who Code, I was not a coder. I didn't bother to learn. I had never built a nonprofit before. The only thing I had done was like, or built was like a failing campaign. And, 10 years later, we've built, one of the largest women and girls organizations in the world. I raised $100 million, for the nonprofit. We taught 500,000 girls. When I started Girls Who Code and you walked into a computer science classroom, there'd be less than 17, 18% girls. Today, MIT, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, Harvard, like every class, now it's like 50%, 40%, 30%. We did that. We've taught more girls than any school district in America. And so it is definitely one of my, and I think, more than just the scale and the numbers, it's just what I know my students are going to do for our country and for
Mhm.
the world.
It's an incredible accomplishment. I mean, we're very lucky at JP Morgan. Our Chief Technology Officer, Lori Beer, is a fantastic role model. But I tell you, across our businesses, the need for technology, engineers, has never been higher, as is our commitment to diversity and equity and inclusion. And you make very good points about the fact this is a very equitable profession and probably will continue to be even more so given the demand. What can companies like JP Morgan do to inspire what you're doing, like with younger women to consider STEM careers, and how can we be part of that solution?
Yeah, I mean, I think continue to commit to the work which you are, right? I mean, when COVID threw us for a loop, right? For all of us, for our students, for our kids in particular. I mean, we had 10,000 Girls Who Code clubs at the start of the pandemic. We're crawling our way back, and it's not easy. So many of the girls, half the girls we teach are Black and Latino, half the girls we teach are under the poverty line. Many of those girls have had to step back from their learning to be caretakers. So there's been an enormous, enormous loss of learning. This is now happening at the same time that so many jobs are being automated, and that so to have some sort of digital skill,
Yeah.
critical. And so we all have to be thinking about this talent pipeline problem and figuring out how we solve it and how we fix it. I'm a big believer, in this idea of like micro credentialing, what I mean? And working with the school systems to help kids start learning these skills that they need to come work at JP Morgan, right? And so we have to be more committed, more thoughtful. Let's not turn away from K through 12 education. A lot of people are not funding this work, in the same way that they were before. And so, our kids need help,
Yeah.
and I think more than ever before, our families are looking to, like I said, march back into the middle class and, get into those high paying jobs, and they're talented and they're ready and they're prepared.
Absolutely. So let's talk more about the impact of COVID, not just on the girls that you work with, but women in the workforce. So I know that certainly people on this call today have been juggling incredible demands of remote working, where your office is your living room and caring for families, homeschooling, and dealing with just the, I think, isolation and uncertainty that I think is wearing everyone out over this last couple of years. Some of the data are really quite disheartening. 2.5 million women in the US have left the workforce in the first year of the pandemic. The International Labor Organization talks about women's employment globally dropping over 4%. I mean, it feels like 30 years of advances getting wiped out in no time at all. And in addition, I think what we see, as you point out, is that the effects are even more pronounced for women of color who are leaving at double the rate of white women. And, I think the more troubling thing for me, I see is as the economy picks back up, you're not seeing women re-enter. What do you think is happening here, and like what are some of the root causes that we need to get after?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we started the pandemic, women were, for the first time ever, were 51% of the labor force.
Yes.
But we were always kind of hanging on a thread. You have to remember that almost 86% of women in the workforce are mothers. And we've always been on this, as I say in my new book, Pay Up, this kind of proverbial seesaw between being an ideal mother and an ideal worker. But somehow we were kind of making it. And then COVID-19 happened, and it exposed the fact that the foundation was never solid to begin with. My personal story, I started 2020 with a newborn baby. Girls Who Code had a Super Bowl ad. I was going to finally take my maternity leave. And then COVID happened. And oftentimes in crises or economic crises, the first resources to go are those to women and girls. And so 3 weeks, I was back at work, homeschooling taking care of my baby, homeschooling my 6-year-old. And, a lot of my leadership team were women with young children. And every day at the end of the night, we were just barely making it. And we would say to each other, well, you know what, when the schools open, everything's going to be fine. We just gotta
Hold on. Yeah.
hold on till September. And I remember that August, how we all got that note, which is like, congratulations, schools are not opening. And we're doing this thing called hybrid learning, where you get to log on your kid at Zoom at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and 11 o'clock, all the while you maintain your full-time job.
Right.
And here's the thing, I naively thought, well, how can they do that without asking us? Because we already knew, right, from March to May, who was doing the Zoom schooling. It was women, right? Yeah. And I naively was waiting for the email to be like, hey, Reshma, can you manage this? And so I think the pain, right, of that, and so then you started seeing millions of women just be pushed out of the workforce. I mean, that December 2020 jobs report, all the jobs lost for women.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, well, where's the plan? And I think why this bothered me so much was, Girls Who Code, I had been solving the technology gender gap. And what you already know is that basically in the 1980s, we were close to parity. Almost 40% of the women of those technology were women. And then Steve Jobs, blah, 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 we pushed women out.
Yeah.
And then for 40 years plus, we've been trying to inch our way back to where we were. Now, the pandemic started at 51, pushed back to where we were in 1989, right? 10, 12, percentage points, whatever. And we think that it's just an on and off switch. And so the fact that no one has a plan, that there's not a women's jobs are, right? Literally trying to figure out and pull the levers was just devastating, shocking to me, and we talk about why this happened. One, women were doing the unpaid labor, the homeschooling, the caretaking. And so when COVID shut down the ability for daycare centers to be open and for schools to be open and for grandparents to come in, it decimated us. So we either had to downshift, moving with our cars or moving with our parents. Secondly, I think many women found themselves, especially women of color, in jobs that were automated by the pandemic, healthcare, education, retail, right? And we didn't have a plan for how we were going to retrain them in these jobs that were no longer, going to exist. We didn't have paid leave. So many women, who had sick children didn't have these understanding employers, And because we don't, again, live in a society where we have paid leave and paid sick days, you know, that was a job loss. So we didn't have the structure, you know what I mean, basically put into place, and it all came crashing down.
So talk about the Marshall Plan for Moms that you proposed. There's some really interesting ideas there to address some of those challenges.
So the Marshall Plan for Moms was basically Reshma being annoyed and angry, writing an op-ed, and then being like, "Oh, I'm going to
How
take a
all good
page
things
ad
start.
in the New York Times to President Biden and tell him what he should do, signed by my 50 friends." You know what I mean? So it really just started off with kind of this tongue-in-cheek, but seriously, like, moms don't work for free. We are not America's social safety net. And as you think about the first 100 days of your presidency, center moms in the economic recovery. And to do that, do these 5 things. Make childcare affordable. Give us paid leave. You know, have cash payments to moms in the form of the child tax credit, you know, and start open up schools safely and start retraining, you know, workers that lost their jobs through automation. And so this ignited a movement and a conversation about motherhood and about working motherhood. You know, the Marshall Plan for moms is now really focused, and this is what my book is about workplaces. You know, as the government relief seems less and less likely, and you still, out of, you know, again, a few weeks ago's job report, still have 1.1 million women missing from the labor force, and the millions of women who that doesn't even count that have downshifted their
And
career
dropped out, yeah.
and dropped out, or are consulting, or are, you know what I mean, or Uber driving, or doing something. That's not the job report don't even calculate that, right? The loss that we're going to see in innovation and diversity when we turn around and we say, JPMorgan, well, why does the senior leadership look like this 10 years from now? Well, we lost all those
There's
women.
no pipeline, exactly right.
No pipeline anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're really focused now on the workplace, on what we can do, you know, in the middle of the Great Resignation, in the middle of the talent war, what we can do, you know what I mean, to help rebuild workplaces that never really worked for us. And this was, again, my big aha. Like, I spent the past 10 years telling girls to, like, you know, lean in and girl boss your way to the top. That, like, there was just an express train to the corner office. You just needed to jump right on it. And COVID expressed to me that until you have gender equality in the home, you're never going to have gender equality in the workplace. That the entire system was always rigged against us. And so to really have a fighting chance at equality, we have to have radically different policies that we put into place, you know, in our workplaces, in our relationships, you know what I mean, in culture.
So that's a very topical subject at the moment, as people are coming back to the office and we're all considering the new workplace and how that's going to work. Again, in your upcoming book, you have I love the chapter in your intro called "We Screwed Up." You talk about the feminist credo in the 80s, and that kind of resonates for me. I've been in investment banking my whole career, and you know, that's certainly traditionally a field that is more male dominated than female, so it's not unusual to have been the only woman in the room, and sometimes even still. And that was the prevailing wisdom. Lean in, you know, you can have it all, go with the culture, be tough, you know, put in the hours, all of that stuff. And that's really hard to do. You know, I'm a wife, I'm a mother of 2 daughters, and, you know, there were lots of times where that balance, as you say, without a pandemic, the balance is tenuous to begin with. Talk about, you know, how being authentic and really just not fitting into the male stereotypical role of what leadership looks like. Why is that important, and how can we start to inculcate that more into our workplaces and cultures?
Yeah, I mean, and part of it is like, I do think that we were asked to always hide our motherhood and to pretend our children didn't exist. And, you know, to not put pictures up, you know what I mean, on your desk, or, you know, to not say, hey, I'm leaving because I have a doctor's appointment, you know. And so it's almost like we had to pretend that they didn't exist. And we weren't crazy for doing that, because the reason why there's a pay gap is because of the motherhood penalty. When you have a child, you are seen as less committed to your job, and men are seen as more needing to take care of somebody, so we should pay them more. So, learning with authenticity is being who you are and being unapologetic about it. Be you. And, I think, especially, for me, for most of my life, it's like growing up as a brown girl, in a working class neighborhood. Like I was, up until 2 years ago, if I went to Starbucks, I used to say that my name was Maya and not Reshma, which is my niece's name. When I ran for office, I would, tie my hair back, put on some fake glasses, and like put on some ugly boxy suit, even though I love hoops and a red lip, right? Like, and every time you try to hide a piece of you,
Yeah.
you don't connect. You don't strive. You're not able to be successful if you hide who you are. And I think for so long, women have been hiding half of ourselves and feeling like imposters. And I think those two things are very connected.
Mm-hmm.
We always assumed imposter syndrome was about qualification and performance and not about hiding our identities. And I think that's more about what this is about.
Yeah, one stems from the other for sure. I think one of the things as we think about the experience that we've had over the last couple of years, if that you can say maybe as a positive, is I think people's humanity and personal life is much more on display, right? For better or for worse. But we've all, whether we like it or not, have lived in each other's living rooms. And, we've all had our kids coming in the middle of Zoom calls and all of this type of thing. And I think that goes both ways. And to be honest, I think even, for our male colleagues, this is somewhat
100%.
liberating as well, because they're actually allowed to be dads and be human as well and not have to carry on, this persona of who they have to be in the office. I think and I'm very optimistic that one of the great things that will come out of this is the stigma of working from home or having flexibility that was always a woman's. It was always kind of your mental model. You jump to that, something that we do for women or mothers. Like, I think now that people have had a taste of that and they've had a taste of it for a sustained period of time, I don't think people are back in the office 60 or 70 hours a week. And so, how do you think does that give you the same degree of optimism? Like, I think this is a real opportunity for us. And I hope an opportunity for women to be able to be, have a bit more of that richness and balance.
Absolutely. I mean, listen, I think that, like, in my books about this, it's like we give men and childless men and women and, trans binary the permission to say what you want. I can't tell you how many men I know who are like, I am not working at a place where I can't take my kids to school. Like, I don't want to go into the office. I mean, it's the men normally that I talk to that feel the most intensely about the end of hustle culture. And I think what's interesting is that, but they rather quit than ask for what they want. And that's part of, I think, the toxic masculinity that exists in culture, in work culture, and workplaces. It's what what we think that you have to behave like to be committed to your job.
Right.
And what's interesting is, like, the past year, the stock market's never been, people's stock prices have never been higher. We've never been more productive. So we simply just can't say that the way that we were doing it before is the way that we have to do it now. It's not people aren't just burnt out. They just don't want to work that way anymore. And that's what the great quit is about, which I call it. It's about, I want to work for you. And I think that the employers that really understand this, they're going to get all the talent. And so I think it's just an opportunity. But listen, I think change is hard. Listen, I was just thinking about this today. I'm CEO of Girls Who Code. I loved FaceTime. I loved people in the office. I loved seeing them. I wanted to know what they were up to. Like, I was the most resistant, you know what I mean, to remote working and flexibility. And I remember, like, early on in Girls Who Code, we would have Fridays work from home, and it was the biggest regret. I was like, why did I was such a, you know what I mean? Like, such a naive CEO that I thought that, like, that was and I always every year tried to, like, get it back.
Come back.
Yeah, so I get it. I get it, but I think the point is we're all different. Like, I have a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old. I was like, please, somebody buy me an office and let me go to it. Like, like, but that's me. And I think we have got to allow people to be in, in workplaces that work for them.
And make them productive, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I guess before we end our conversation here, I think that there is a lot of what you're saying, I think is gonna hit home for people here, but what advice do you have for the women listening about how to be brave? We have been so trained to be perfect, like how do you make that leap? And what advice would you offer to the
Yeah.
folks that are listening today?
I would say you can't be brave if you're tired. And we're all so exhausted. And so I always say all of us have to figure out like what we're doing for ourselves. When I built Girls Who Code, I missed so much. It was a lot of struggle to have kids, and by the time I had my first son, never saw him crawl, never saw him walk, never did bath time, missed his first word, and because I was on 2, 3 planes a week, and I thought that that was the price that I had to pay for ambition. And for my this baby, thank blessing COVID, I do everything. And I am now building my second movement. And I promise you that like this one will be bigger than Girls Who Code. But I'm not going to do it the way that I did it before.
Right.
I'm not going to do it at that sacrifice. This time around, I'm going to sleep. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to say no a lot to, to traveling. I'm not missing anything.
Right.
And I'm going to I'm going to put the identity that matters to me the most, which in many ways is being a mom, and be proud of that, and that not take anything away from me being a social entrepreneur or a change agent.
Well, absolutely great advice. And thank you so much for the conversation today. And thank you for everything that you do to advocate for girls and women. And again, thanks to all of our colleagues and clients who joined us today for this great conversation. So Reshma, it's been a pleasure. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful to talk to you.
You too. Thanks.